What up, guys? Welcome back to the Card Brothers. Today I'm here with Nick, and we're doing a format view today. So let's go ahead and jump right into it. We have a lot of opinions based on what we have seen, especially after a Rise Heart getting hit. And so I'm going to let Nick kind of take it away with the first one, and maybe we can talk about it a little bit.
Yeah, so overall, the format is like extremely diverse because you'll see in here in a second. We have like I think it's like 21 viable decks that you can actually play right now in this format and compete. So just having a Rise Heart gone is absolutely huge. So it just allows like so many more decks to play, and you'll kind of see that whenever we start going over everything. But yeah, we'll just go ahead and get right into it with number one. Probably the
Being
best deck in the room is Unchained.
Unchained. Yeah, it's not really a surprise. The deck got really, really, really good support. The way it interacts with other decks is really broken. It's always been broken in the way it interacts, um, because destruction is. I mean, if really the only way to out unchain boards is like Zeusing them, right?
Yeah, and even then, like Shyama still gets his effect. You know, he can still start doing stuff. So
Right. So like you kind of have to play really weird if you're playing against this deck. Like if you can make Dweller, I think that's really good. Um,
mm,
I like I like banished effects, so maybe evenly. Um, but other than that, like you kind of struggle because their interactions are just so funky. Like targeted destruction, um, link summoning with your monsters. Um, it does all of the same things it did before, way more consistently. The end board includes a negate, um, which is crazy that non once per turn. I think it's a DDD card that
yeah,
they
it's
set
the
up.
makes sense.
So I mean, it just is very consistent. It does a lot.
And it can also play through boards like crazy. Like with cards like which we'll talk about it again later, but like triple, the thrust.
Oh my
That
god,
card is
dude.
absolutely insane in the deck. Just being able to set any of the traps. It's like Shima being able to play through stuff, or Kaya just being able to quick effect, dodge effects. The trap cards being able to activate on your turn to dodge stuff like evenly, droplets, whatever like, side deck card you want to play. So like it has a whole lot of playthrough ability, and like the board that it can set up is also like really impressive to a whole lot of decks right now.
For sure. Yeah. I mean, I'm surprised it kind of didn't get hit on the ban list. Like, it could have used a little slap on the wrist. Same thing they did to Pearly, in my opinion, because I really think it is the best deck, like, bar none. Um,
Mm-hmm.
so I guess we'll kind of see as the format progresses more and more. But I think, which one were we looking at? Dortmund? I think Dortmund it had, like,
Yeah,
a lot of representation, did
yeah. I
really
think it was
well.
like second or third most represented deck, something like that. So
Yeah, which is crazy. I mean, I've always loved Unchained, so it's cool to see it in this position, but I also am getting sick of it. So the
yeah,
format's just
it's
started.
a little oppressive.
So
Uh, and talking about oppressive, the next deck we're going to talk about is Flu. Everybody's you either love it or you hate it. Um,
I
most people hate it.
I played against this deck way too much to enjoy
Yeah,
it. It's a shifter deck that goes stupid and sets up Baguska. So shifter Baguska, floodgate dot turbo dot normal summon, cry about it. Um,
yeah. Which is so crazy because like there are so many decks like right now in the format that are normal summon reliant that like they always get their map effects. Like the Harvey's Featherstorm is insane. D Shifter is still just because like people aren't prepared for Macrocosmos anymore because Rise Heart's gone, so they're just not building their decks to play around it. So just having D Shifter and like in their deck, period, is just gonna be crazy.
Rise is still broken, Avion's still broken, and of course, the stupid M Pen. They
Mm-hmm.
all are just crazy boss monsters that are hard to deal with, and usually you have to deal with more than one per turn. So plus they get these crazy side card bonuses like Featherest, and like they can play. We'll get more into the side deck, I guess, a little later, but like D
Mm-hmm.
barrier is crazy in that deck too. Um,
Yeah, this
so
is another deck that can abuse Thrust.
yep,
Oh, you Ash my Eagle, and sure, you don't get monster effects, idiot.
yeah, get good, you
Like,
know.
that's
Uh,
what it is. You
And
know.
with that being said, we can move on to the next deck, which, if any of you guys have followed my channel, you'll know that I love this deck. Um, and it's actually in kind of a really good position, which would be Tier Element. You can ask Nick. I've played this deck since it was bad. And so now that it's good, I'm like, maybe I don't want to play this.
Yeah, really.
Yeah, but it still goes crazy. We still have Keldo, Agito. We still get to mill 20 per turn, and we usually get to resolve all three names if you build a consistent enough list. Speaking of, we saw some of like the YCS Dortmund lists, and they weren't playing King of the Swamp, which I found very interesting because I feel like that card's super necessary. Um, but I guess if we aren't playing into like Omni negates or like crazy going second cards, we don't really need like Rukalos or Grapha, you know? So maybe he's onto something. I don't really know. Obviously, he did well. So, um,
Yeah, some of the other things that we're also seeing from the deck is like the Bahamut Toad package is becoming really popular. You know, if you like watch like DB Grinder or stuff like that, a lot of the decks that he's been featuring are playing that package. Just just another layer of interruption for the deck. It's pretty nice.
I know a lot of people at our locals have been talking about you pretty much can play like a Shizu tier at this point now because you just play all the Bestials again, and which obviously is in our highlighted side cards. Might even be main deck in a lot of these decks because it does counter quite a few of the really good decks.
Yeah.
So, yeah, I mean, tier's in a good spot. If you guys like the mermaids, I recommend playing it.
Yeah, it play like it's the same thing. Like Tier Them as Cash Tier is sort of it's probably it's literally just the best card in the whole deck. Like it's free extension, free bodies. It's huge. It's yeah. Just that addition to the deck just made it so they can play through just having the one names now. So
it mills crazy. Just having it as an interruption too, and getting to do all your stupid tier effects again and again. A lot of tier players are going to cross sheep because you can summon back Diviner or Rhino now, and so you still get to trigger more. I mean, you get to trigger 4 tier elements at least usually. So nuts.
awesome. Yeah. Well, everybody's like a tier 1.5 deck branded. Uh, this deck will never be like actually tier 1. Because as soon as it gets good, everybody plays Ash and then it just dies. But regardless, it's still like super consistent. It still basically has all of its combo pieces. Bistol Serenir still at 3, the Bellion still at 3, so they can still like they're getting to branded fusion.
Aliber, opening, fusion, all everything. At 3. So, I mean,
they still have the Demon Puppet and Sanctifier. Like this deck is literally untouched.
The deck is good. I mean, there's not much more to be said about it. Like it's kind of like Flu. It's been around for a while. It still does the same thing, just with a little more combo pieces like Quem, and a lot of people are turning like the Nadir Servant package just because it gives you so much advantage. And now that Arise Heart isn't a thing, you can still send cards to the grave, which obviously you need to do if you're going to resolve Nadir Servant, or if some people are playing Ecclesia. So super important. Yeah, it's good.
It's also fun stuff about this deck actually too that I've seen some players actually moving over to Ido rather than the Gimmick Puppet, just because Flu is becoming like more popular and they can just play through that. Doesn't really care. They're also playing Lancia, which you'll see in the side deck as well, because you can set it off Branded Fusion and then summon it back with the Sanctifier, uses effect, and then your opponent can't manage for the turn, and it's just free.
I haven't seen that. That's hilarious, actually. Yeah, I really like that.
Really cool.
That's a neat interaction. And obviously Lancia is really good because it does beat Flu. And I mean, I guess it beats a couple of decks on here. But nothing.
It beats Flu, and then it kind of beats like the next deck that we're going to talk about, like Dragon Link. It really hurts them.
Oh yeah, for sure.
Like that. So I guess we can go and talking about Dragon Link. I mean, technically the deck got hit, but did it really? Like,
it's still broken.
One Magnemud's good. Like the Chaos Space hit was good. Like that was probably the card, like one of the cards to hit. But like until you get rid of like the Regained, basically once you get rid of Regained or Striker Dragon, the deck kind of like crumbles. But until that happens, the deck's always going to be viable.
Yeah, I mean, I hate this deck, man. I get comboed into oblivion every time I play it. They always have 20 Bestials in their hand. They hit all of my tier elements. It's still good. It will probably always be good. I mean, it's to the point where like you can't really hit anything else before it becomes unplayable. Like it just becomes a pile of cards if you hit anything else now. Yeah. So I can't imagine it gets touched again, but you never know.
And like, if we're being honest, like the board that the deck sets up, it's good, but it's not like unfair. Yeah. What is it like a pop, a negate, or like 2 negates, something like that?
The most unfair part of the deck, in my opinion, was triggering Magnemite, and then triggering Magnemite, and then triggering Magnemite, having the interruption
Yeah.
every single turn, just chunk blocking your opponent until you can swing into all their monsters with Boron. So it
Yeah.
kind of still does the same thing, except they might not see Magnemite, so who knows?
Yeah. They just have to get to it instead of just having it,
Yep.
essentially.
Yep.
Cool.
It's
All right.
still it's just dealing, but moving on to the next, we
Yeah.
have the cats. This deck's nuts. I really am surprised that it's not doing more. If I'm being honest, like I thought this deck was gonna be the best deck for the foreseeable future.
Mhm.
But it's good. I mean,
Yeah.
but it's like
I think a lot of people are just more prepared for the deck now. They know how to play against the deck a whole lot more now. A lot of the tech choices being played right now help play against it really easily.
people are
Um,
siding kaijus. People are putting goddess in the extra
I mean,
deck.
yeah, people are playing like Herald of the Abyss, and they're playing Thrust already. So like, there's just so many ways that we can out in the war now.
Yeah.
And this being main decked essentially for free.
Yeah, I mean the deck's good. You get a lot of advantage if you manage to get the sleepy. In my opinion, every time I've played the deck, it seemed inconsistent, but you know how I am with the stupid piles. So maybe it's more consistent than what I saw, but I don't like relying on like sacking my opponent, you know.
Hmm.
Um, and the deck math seems a little weird, but it is a very very powerful deck. Good meta contention. I'd say tier one this format probably. It's probably next to Unchained or
Yeah, these first six, I put all of these in like the upper echelon of the decks right now.
yeah, I would say yeah. If I had to rank them, I'd say like Flu might beat Pearly if I'm being honest. But you never know. It could be a toss up. Kind of wins who wins the die roll.
It, it depends on if they open D shift or not. Like it is what it
Yeah,
is.
yeah, get good.
Yeah,
Um,
geez.
Speaking of
So I guess
good,
yeah, it's like
Manadium.
I guess yeah, from here on out, it's more like tier like two ish, high tier two. It's just kind of where Manadium kind of sits. It gets a whole lot stronger once Ego comes out, but then again, the format completely changes. Um, Go ahead.
What do you think of that? Because yeah, the format completely changes. We're gonna get into what I think is gonna happen once all the new cards come out. I'd say Manadium probably is up there next to Unchained once the new cards come out. But I'd also say one of the decks we haven't spoken about yet will become the best deck. That might be Cope. So, um,
I mean, like the combo, like if this deck is allowed to pop off, the deck wins.
yeah,
Period. Like once it goes off, I mean, you have like the FTK variant with the the what is the hot red?
Bishbolkin.
Yeah, no, yeah, with Bitch Vulcan and hot red.
Yeah,
Or yeah, the King Calamity, whatever it is.
yeah.
They have that version, or you can do like the big board. You're ending on like Baron, Bestial, like trap card, everything. So either way, like if the deck's allowed to go, the deck's gonna win.
Yeah.
Um,
I
it just go ahead.
I think the new Visas guy is really good for the deck. But as it sits right now, I'd say definitely tier two. Um,
Yeah.
it has to go first. It has to win the die roll. If your opponent sees Droll, they lose. Speaking of
Hmm.
Droll, probably a side card, but also a good time maybe to talk about Droll a little bit, considering
Yeah. Definitely.
how crazy relevant it was, and how it's kind of falling out of favor. Um, I think
Yeah. I mean, it's really good. It's good against everything except for like branded and unchained.
and it's hard to like make room in decks when they lose to the best deck of the format, right?
Yeah.
Like the Droll does nothing to Unchained, and Unchained is probably the hardest matchup for many competitive decks. So why are you going to waste side spots on a card that does nothing? You know,
Yeah.
I'd say if you're playing any of the tier two and under decks, it should be in your side because it does beat tier laments. It does beat flu. It does do good against Dragon Link. Does do good against Pearly. But you're really targeting those decks. Whereas if you're playing a tier one deck, you're playing to beat the best deck, right? So tier arguably can beat Unchained without Droll. You're gonna just side better cards. So
Hmm.
it's kind of a toss up. Depends on how you want to play, what you want to do.
And you can also look at like the rest of the decks that we have up here, and it hurts a lot of them.
Yes.
Um, but like we were saying, like it only like the best decks that you're gonna be playing against, most of them aren't gonna be super impacted by Droll, but it's gonna basically shut out all the decks below it.
Yep.
Um, so if you're looking for like, if you're going to like a regional and you're looking for like an invite, maybe you're not looking to like really top it. Maybe this is something that you could play just because it's more diverse. It's kind of like Ash Blossom. It kind of hits almost everything. It's super diverse, and you can play it in just play it almost against everything. But like you're probably going to lose 1, 2, or 3 games against this like Unchained, branded, against like Labyrinth, other stuff like that, just because like the card doesn't do anything against them.
Yeah, I'm sure a lot of people at YCS were probably wishing they had it, considering the deck that won, which is our next deck up on the top. Rika, I do think it does very well against Rika. I mean, obviously they have their normal game plan, but a lot of those cards are adding. A lot of them are, you have to resolve the effect to add to even trigger them. So
Mm-hmm.
speaking of Rika, I think the deck is good. I like where you put it on here. I think it's it's one of those decks that's like Unchained. In the past, Unchained, it had really weird interactions. Like the way it interacted with decks was very powerful, but you have to be able to set up the board. You have to hope they don't see certain cards for it to win. Whereas Unchained got support, and now it doesn't really care about that as much. Rika's still at that point. But I do think it's still a very strong deck. If you go first, you set up your board, you're going to win. It's just like Vanadium. It is a go first, crazy full power synchro spam. I guess it doesn't synchro, but you know what I mean. Like it spams the
Yeah,
board
just
with a
like
bunch of
big
guys.
big board.
Yeah.
Yeah. The other thing is like a good pilot of this deck is going to know how to play through so many interruptions. Like they're going to be able to establish something. Like you saw it in the finals against the Vanquish Soul guy. Dude, he played through two DD Crows, a Bell, and still ended on interruptions. Like it was absolutely insane.
That's insane.
Um, so like a good pilot for this deck is going to do really well. Which I mean, of course, we've seen in literally every like European nationals or YCS ever. Like it's just the best deck in Europe. But yeah, and also the side deck cards that this thing can play, like the Rose Whip, Cactus Bouncer, the well, I can't remember the name of it. The Water Spirit. It's basically just like
All the plant
a
cards.
pointer. Yeah, it's basically like a pointer of the Red Lotus, but for like water plant cards or something like that.
Mm-hmm.
So a whole lot of versatility that you can have with this deck. A lot of inboards that you can do. It's just insane. One card combo.
the
So
yeah the tributing aspect of this deck, the field spell, making the deck insane, as well as I believe Princess is the one that negates. Uh,
yeah,
so I mean, just the inherent effects of those cards on top of them being combos, pieces, and starters, kind of broken. So
yeah,
um,
cool.
yeah, moving on to the
Going.
next one. I'll let you
This is
talk about
probably
this.
I so this deck, I personally want to get into it like a whole lot. I think there's a whole lot of really cool things you can do with that deck, and it's Vanquish Soul. I think this is probably one of the best and probably one of the most like high skill mid range decks that we've had in a long time. You have to know matchups really well. You have to play almost perfectly. You can also play really crazy techs in this deck just to match attributes like Bell, Fenrir, all that other stuff. I just think that this deck is like has a whole lot of potential for this format.
I totally agree. It's one of those decks that's striker esque, whereas you have to be a perfect pilot to play it. Period. You have to know every matchup. You have to know what your opponent is trying to accomplish. You have to know what your deck does to get around that. Um, it is a very powerful deck. It has a lot of draw power. It has a lot of advantage gain, which I really like about it, but it is a little slow, which is probably why it's a little
Mhm.
further down here. And just like Nick said, you have to know everything about the deck. You have to know the entire encompassing, body of the deck. So, um,
Yeah, being able to play like 2, 3 turns ahead, just knowing okay they're going to be getting these resources back, and I have to get this to try and counter it.
I have to know what
Um,
attributes are in my hand. I have to know what column I'm summoning my guys to. I have to know when I should activate my card effects to dodge certain effects. Um, It's probably a very confusing deck for a lot of newer players. So if you're newer to the game, I would avoid this. But if you are a veteran and you enjoy complicated decks, I would recommend this one for sure.
Definitely, yeah. And like, I mean, shout out to Javi. He's a player at Oblivion Games here in Tampa. He's been playing this deck for a long time, and he just smokes people with it. It's absolutely insane. So shout out
I've
to him.
watched one or two of his matches. It's
Yeah,
actually absurd what you can do if you know what these cards do. So
yeah. All right. Well, going on to the next one. This is Labyrinth. I wasn't sure where to put this deck. Because Eradicator doesn't do what it used to.
so I agree, right? And the reason this is the deck that I was talking about when I said that the meta will shift, and I think one of the decks is going to be the best deck. This deck is going to be crazy with the new Butler. That card is insane. It is the best card in the deck. You don't have to play a lot of the bricks. You can play the stun variant now. You don't have to play IKEA once you have that card. Um, and I really think it'll be in a really good spot. I felt that way before when the lady was announced and it was like really close to being good as Cash, you know, when we were in that weird format. Um, but I really think the Butler's going to be broken. But where it sits now is probably right here, right around Sprite level. Um, it's good. It does the things that it does, but the power cards it had just aren't as good. Like you're not just gonna win the game by eradicating your opponent. Like in the past with the the Kashtira at nationals, like that's just not gonna happen now. But it is still good. It's still powerful. You can still set a lot of the broken traps, um, like Dimension Barrier. Waybridge is still broken, but not as many people are playing it because you do need to see a lot of your combo pieces, and people are playing the IKEA build. Um, so powerful deck, but it probably deserves to sit right around here.
Yeah, and it kind of has the same issue as Branded. Like once it gets super popular, people are going to be able to be prepared for it. They're going to have back row removal. They're going to have their ash blossoms, their bells, that kind of stuff, just to be prepared for it. So regardless, it's going to be something hard to play if it ever becomes popular.
On the
So
plus side, if you are playing it right now, I feel like back row is kind of out, in my opinion, because of Unchained. So you might only have to deal with some cosmics or some evenlies. I mean, the deck does lose to evenly, unfortunately, but you aren't dealing with your dusters, your storms, your like blowout cards for the deck.
mm-hmm.
So if you were going to play it now, now's the time to play it, in my opinion, because once it becomes popular again, you're going to have to deal with the really boring matchups of your opponent normal summon Denko Seka and you lost, you know?
Yeah.
So, um, yeah, I like where you put it for sure.
All right. For the next two decks, I mean, we can kind of talk about them separately, but they're very similar. The first one's going to be just like Sprite, like pure Sprite, maybe adding some of the Melfi cards, maybe some of the runic variants, and then basically, I feel like it has a totally different play style. But the Fright or the not Fright for the I wish Fright was in here. Uh, for higher runic Sprite. They're both they play super differently, so we're gonna have to talk about them separately.
Mm-hmm.
The Sprite deck I think is absolutely just like crazy consistent right now. The boards that it can make are still really really strong. It still has smashers, which is really good against the Unchained matchup. So there's a whole lot of really good things going for this deck right now.
Yeah, I agree. Sprite's still special blue, add jet, special jet, add starter, make gigantic,
Yeah,
go stupid. Like the deck still does what it's always done. So I agree, it is in a good spot, but it kind of loses to a lot of interaction, and some of
mm,
these it loses to weird interaction too. And the reason I like where you put it is because of how Unchained plays. The deck loses when you get rid of its level 2 normal summon, which is also why it loses to flu. Um, because you have to
mm-hmm.
stick your normal summon or you have to stick your starter to even try to play the game. And if they link your guy away or they have some sort of removal like the pop, like the trap in Unchained, or if you normal summon and they tribute your monster, you lose. So,
Yeah,
um, but if you
but yeah,
can
like
play very conservatively, I think it's good.
Yeah, like it also has, it plays through interactions, like interruptions, like hand traps really well. With the extension with sprint, being able to have red and carrot up just to prevent interactions, stuff like that. Um, you can also play like the adventure cards just so you can have things stick. You know, there's a whole lot of different variants for the just like the sprite deck that you can play. You know, Hugin, uh, all the runic cards, all those are just going to be super duper viable in this format as well. So,
Speaking
and then
of,
also,
yeah,
yeah, speaking of like the freaking runic cards, uh, the for hire deck is app. I think this kind of me and Caleb were kind of talking about it before. A good pilot with this deck is almost unbeatable.
it's just like the Vanquish Soul deck. You have to be good at piloting this deck. But the fact that Arise Heart is gone does put the runic cards back into the game because you need to be able to shuffle them back. Um, and I really think this deck is broken. I played against it a couple times at nationals, and obviously we're in a different format now because we don't have a Rise Heart. But the deck is absurd. It just feels so strong, drawing six every single turn. It generates so much advantage. It sets up a negate, which is really nice. I mean, a lot of these decks that you're seeing up top don't have that, you know. So yeah, I think it's good. Rex is broken. Um, I hate playing
Also, I
against it.
think I think part of it is like all the runic cards are essentially going second options. They're also extenders. Like half the deck is just Italy for free. Um, and they can also just use and abuse all the sprite cards, the runic cards, and then the fight for stuff just adds another layer of like you know
Or the
free
fur hire.
extension.
Yeah.
Yeah, just everything. So it also just gains a whole lot of advantage. I think it's just really. It's also relatively consistent. I believe I haven't played against it too much, but I know there's been a whole lot of my friends that have been playing out. So
Yeah.
cool.
Very good choice, but you do have to pilot it very well. So if you're going to play this deck, make sure you get some testing in for sure.
Well, speaking of like hand advantage, the Chimera deck is literally like hand advantage to the deck. This I think I played this deck for like a month and a half, almost 2 months, and I really enjoyed it. There's a whole lot of cool interactions that you can play with this deck. Like the King Tiger Wengu is just super duper good against like a lot of like a lot of decks right now against Pearly, against if you happen to have like Sword Soul in your area, just a whole lot of really niche decks lose to that card. Um, they're playing Dragoon. The Guardian Chimera is huge in this deck. Just so much advantage with Fenrir, which is one of the tech cards that we're going to talk about. That card is insane in the deck. It's a body plus a card plus a monster in hand for Guardian Chimera. Just so much free. It's literally just so much stuff.
So I do have to say you definitely know more about this deck than I do. But from what I've seen and what I've played against and tested against, this deck feels crazy. The hand advantage is crazy. Summoning Chimera over and over is crazy. Hand looping your opponent is crazy. Um, Keeping the advantage, being able to use your fusion spell more than once per turn. And like you said, Wang Hu is nuts. I love the people who were citing Burden of the Mighty and summoning Wang Hu. That was hilarious. Like cry
Yeah.
about it, you know. So yeah, really funny deck. Really powerful. The
This deck
negate.
also gets a whole lot of new stuff in the actually it gets a new fusion in the next set,
I didn't
which
know that.
basically allows it to FTK. I'm not sure if you know about this.
I haven't heard of it.
Yeah, basically Trickstar Reincarnation Droll. You remember that
Of
combo?
course, unfortunately.
Yeah, this card can basically do that.
Wow.
Because it's really crazy. There's like I can't remember the name of the trap card, but it basically says like your opponent shuffles in their hand,
Mm-hmm.
draws a new one, and then the new fusion says you can dump a fiend from your deck to the graveyard, and then the old fusion says you can summon one. So then you just summon I think it's like Protector of the Sanctuary, which says your opponent can't draw cards. So your opponent shuffles their hand in, and then they can't draw cards anymore.
That is disgusting. Like
Yeah,
holy.
shout out to I think his name was Gaizo. He's like the branded god. Shout out to him for kind of you know putting me on that. So bunch of really cool stuff that you can do with this deck. A lot of really cool stuff.
Yeah, for sure. That's awesome. I'm gonna have to look into it because it is another fusion deck, and you guys know how I get with those. So uh, I'll have to look into it for sure. Um,
All right.
Speaking of the next
So
deck,
yeah, this deck's awesome, man. I think the amount of stuff that Rescue Ace can do is just awesome.
it's
You
one of
know, like it
those
has.
decks, man. It's one of those decks. It seemed so crazy. You read the cards and you're like, oh my god, like like I'm gonna freaking destroy my opponent. Like they don't stand a chance. And then they go imperm, and you're like, oh
Yeah, you just kind of cry. Yeah.
yeah. So
I will say there's a whole lot of variance with this deck. Like you can do the uh, like people are summoning Ibli in this deck with Puzzle Amino. They are doing the Mud Dragon line to help play around stuff like Imperm, Effect Veiler. Uh, it's one of those things where it's like a good pilot will know be able to play the lines correctly, so they get the most advantage out of everything. Um, but really, if an opponent knows how to play around this deck, it's gonna be a tough matchup regardless.
yeah, I think it's a good deck. I don't know what all of the cards do, but I do know that this is one of those decks that's projected to become the best deck, similar with how Pearly was before we got here. It has some crazy cards coming out, to my knowledge, and it's supposed to be the deck to play. So pick up your hydrants now, I guess.
Yeah, or don't because they're like $40, $50 right now minimum.
So yeah,
Um,
it's cool, but
and a lot of cool lines, a whole lot of different plays that you can do. So look into it. It's
yeah.
definitely something worth it.
Uh,
Uh, the next deck, I think I wasn't sure if I wanted to put this deck
so I think like
list.
anything after the rescue ace, I think these are honorable mentions in my opinion. Maybe Salad
Hmm.
can move up a little bit, but these are kind of honorable mentions. I think they have potential. Um, we're missing another deck in here that does have potential, which we can talk about later. Um, but we're going to talk about the Synchron deck. I have seen based on our locals, so it's probably different for everyone. But from what I have seen, this deck is nuts, dude. Um, we have a guy at our locals, and Nick knows him very well. His name is Steven, and he is the buy. But he is not the buy with this deck. So if he's not the buy with the deck, it is cooking. So,
Yeah,
um,
I mean, once Drunk Speeder's allowed to, like, if Drunk Speeder resolves, you're probably winning that game. You
yep.
know, it's kind of like we were talking like with the Vanadium deck. It has so many different variants. It has the Hot Red Calamity Negate board. It has like it can literally rip all five cards out of your hand. Like, there's so many different versions of this deck that you can play, and all of them are going to win you the game.
The diversity is crazy. I mean, I was even playing this deck in Tier Laments because you could make Ancient Fairy. So Revolution Synchron's broken, being able to use it from your hand, being able to mill a card to summon itself back. Um, just so incredibly powerful. Like, we haven't really seen anything like that before. I guess we have with like Link Summoning, and there's a couple other cards that do it, but a generic, more generic synchro card from hand is just nuts. Um,
It's also just another like it's basically just global but almost better. Like
100%.
it's a whole lot of really crazy things you can do just with that card alone, and the Synchron deck can really just use and abuse it. So I mean they can literally just summon it from deck.
Yeah, it's insane. Um, Speaking of another card that's insane that I believe was recently put to 3, right? That
Yes,
would
sir.
be Gazelle, baby. Um,
Yes,
this deck
the
is
deck is
crazy.
finally at full power. Yeah, it's full power. It's insane.
Some would say it's fire, um, but it is good. Uh, I don't know much about this deck if I'm being honest. I kind of played like started really competitively playing right after this deck was like full power. Um, but I do know it had some support cards, most of which aren't the best, but they are good and they help the deck extend. Nick, if you know more about it, take it away.
Yeah, so I've been slowly collecting the cards, hoping to play it soon. But like they actually the support that they got out of the new fire set is, for all pun intended, it's fire.
Oh,
Like
okay, okay.
Sally Migrate Fire, the new level 2 guy, he's literally just Rhoda for the entire like archetype. The Link 4, it searches any of the trap cards. Like the deck still has all the recursion that it had before. It has Gazelle to play through ability. The deck just it does a whole lot, but it still ends on a nib token. So, like if that card, like I was saying with all the other, some of the other decks we were talking about before, it'll never be tier one, at least while Nib is around, just because once this deck starts getting, more popular, you're going to see it more often at high tier events. More people are going to be playing Nibiru, and more people are going to know how to play, where to interact, stuff like that. So, I think it's a good deck. It has a whole lot of room for non-engine, playthroughability, stuff like that. I think it's a good choice regardless. Um, and a lot of the new cards are not going to know what they do, so it'd be a good choice to take to like a regional or something. I think.
Speaking of which, it's also one of those decks that you do have to know what you're doing to play it. I don't know if you saw the Yu-Gi-Oh controversy stuff. You haven't,
No.
where we had a new player who came from Hearthstone try out Yu-Gi-Oh, and their chat recommended Salad. I don't agree with that. I think Salad's one of the harder decks to
Oh,
play.
actually, yeah, I do know what you're talking about. Yeah,
Yeah, I think it's one of those decks that you do need to be a good pilot for. Maybe not as punishing as like For Hire or Vanquish Soul, but it's pretty close to that. You need to know what
yeah,
your cards do. You need to know what your goal is. You need to know future steps, why you're sending stuff, why you put the trap in the grave when it does nothing in the grave. Like it's 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 one of those decks. So I do think it's going to be good for a while. It has been good for a while. It's like D-Link. It's not going to go away. So if you wanted to play this, if you're getting into the game and you want a deck to pick up, and you know how to play, I would recommend this, just because there's nothing going to get hit and you'll be able to learn a lot by playing it.
yeah. And kind of like you were saying, it's not something that's going to get hit, so you can you can invest into it. You should be fine. And you can really take the time, the however long it takes you to learn a deck. People are different, but if you really take the time to learn the deck, it'll do good for you.
Yeah,
So
it's one of those decks that, like, if a Master Duel was converting, a Master Duel player was converting, I would tell him to pick up Salad.
yeah,
You know what I
that's
mean?
good. That's a really good comparison. Yeah.
So, yeah, moving on to the next deck, we have
Everybody's favorite.
the carcass of what used to be known as Kashtira. Um, this deck is still a deck, unfortunately. Um,
Mhm.
it it sets up Shangri, and it plays a control esque game style. I believe.
Mhm.
I mean, are they putting Bestials in? I don't really know like too much about it because I knew it was like, eh. I mean, Fenrir's at 3, so it's good, but
Well, I mean, it still has like combo potential. I've seen some people starting to do more with like the Raid Raptor engine,
okay.
where they're ending on like the F-Zero. They're ending on like a bunch of other like the board's actually pretty decent, and at the end of the day, um, so the deck still has a lot of potential. I think personally, it's probably going to be more of a going second type deck.
That's how
Trying
the deck should
to
have been, in my opinion.
yeah. I mean, I personally I want to be trying it out with like the Zodiac cards. Really just trying to establish a Zeus, and then just setting up really anything afterwards. So
It's
I think the
it's
deck. Go ahead.
it's a I would say it's a rogue deck. Um,
Yeah,
it's one of those decks that you invested a lot of money into, and you're gonna play it because you still have it.
yeah,
But
yeah.
it's still playable, so kind of.
I mean, they still have 2 unicorns and 3 planets. The whole entire deck's game plan to essentially get to Fenrir, which is probably one of the best cards in the format. So, I mean, heck, just sitting on Unicorn, Fenrir plus like a couple, couple hand traps, you're still gonna be good to go.
You still have advantage for sure. I agree.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's a good point. Um, Moving on to another deck that was kind of neutered, but somehow one of our buddies got first place with, uh,
That's
is
fine.
MathMech. Um, it's still MathMech. I mean it's
It's it's again, it's always going to be a deck. Until Circular dies, like all roads lead to circular essentially.
I'm
I
out
mean,
for a
heck,
bit
you
with that
can
guy's head, dude.
yeah, like you can even like with the list that you can actually check it up on the channel. Shout out to Jad, the Vanquish Soul Mathmech list.
Yes.
Literally all roads lead to circular. So like, um, regardless, as long as this card's at 1, the deck's gonna be viable. It still has update access code. OTK lines. It has the new fire or not new, but new-ish firewall card to start playing if they want to use that. If you want to do Heat Soul plus just the trap card plus conflict, whatever. There's so many things you can do with this deck. It's really really cool.
It is a good deck. It's one of those low investment, high payoff decks. So if you do see any way to circular, you are probably going to win, um, as long as you're going first. It does have some of those like weird going second hands where like you can still OTK because you got access code and can just swing, but you know those are one offs. So
Yeah,
um,
I mean the deck has a whole lot of room for non-engine, whether it be hand traps or blowout cards. So I think that's gonna have also just because of Rise Heart or Castro Rise Heart just not being in the format circuit, it just becomes objectively just better. Like the deck can actually play out of its own graveyard now. So
yeah, for
I
sure.
think it's going to be a good choice,
I agree.
regardless.
Speaking of, we have the Infernoble Knights. Now we saw somebody who was on crack who was playing this with Makonko. Um, I don't really know what was
Dude,
going on there.
yeah, oh, what the CS was is insane.
That guy was
Like,
just on crack. I don't know. Maybe he knows something that I don't, which is probably true because he made top 64. But it the I mean the new cards are good. I think the deck is cool. I've always liked this archetype. Um, and Isolde is still a broken Yu-Gi-Oh card. It will always be a broken Yu-Gi-Oh card. Um, I specifically remember the memes of like Halka Fibrax in Isolde and like Chaos Ruler, and it was like, why is it always U3? Isolde is one of those cards that it's going to be blamed for broken things because it does lead to broken stuff. So the end board with this deck is crazy. It's still it finally can keep follow up. Gearfried's a broken card, having your negates. So I mean, not much more to say
yeah, the
about it.
first turn
Yeah,
board for this, yeah, the first turn board for this deck is absolutely insane. It still has the same issues that it had before, where going second it can struggle. But I think a lot of that can be mitigated just by players. Some players just don't know what the deck does. Kind of like we were talking about before with other decks. Some people just don't know what the cards do, so they won't know where to interact or how to interact with the deck. So you can usually get a couple free wins like that.
the best card in the deck is still the Neospatian, uh, ripping a
Yeah,
card from the hand and then going full combo. So get rid of
yeah,
their
just
Ash,
hand
tell them to
knowledge.
cry about it, and we
Yeah,
go crazy. Um,
yeah. And the more crazy part about that stuff is it's like if that resolves, you get to look at your hand. They get to look at your hand. They get to set up their board according to your hand, and they can play through any of the hand traps that you have. So like that just that combo alone is free. It's so good.
yeah, for
So
sure, for sure. Um, moving on to the next deck, which you and I both agreed, since Stroll is kind of in this weird out of favor state, um, is going to be Dark World. Now, before we get into it, I did see a crazy match of this Thursday. Mason. Some of you guys who've been following the channel for a while also know Mason. He played against this deck and did droll them. And on resolution, they activated card destruction. So
wow,
I mean, it can
just
it can sack the heck out of your opponent. They got all the advantage because they summoned all their dudes back, and then Mason drew 0. So, uh, you know, but anyways, getting into the deck, it's powerful. The combos are crazy. You get to play the dangers. You get to draw a ton of cards. You set up really nice boards. The Graph of Fusion's crazy. You keep the hand advantage because you're bouncing all your cards from the field. Um, Anything to add?
yeah. I mean, this deck like it can play through a whole lot of hand traps. It can play through like disruptions, anything like that. Like just the amount of destruction, interruptions, hand advantage this deck can get is really, really good. It also just gets so much more insane with the new Horus cards, um, with this rank 8 turbo essentially. So I think this deck has a whole lot of potential. Um, there's less decks that are playing like 14, 15 hand traps this format, and I think that this deck can kind of take advantage of that, of that fact, because they can either rip your hand or they can make an unbreakable board. So it's kind of like either you draw them and you win, or you don't and you lose. So
Yep, for sure. Plus, we get colorless, and colorless is a sick looking card. So,
oh god,
not that
yes.
it's good, but it
I
looks cool.
mean, all the Dark World arts are awesome,
Yeah,
but
they look insane. Now we're gonna move on to my baby. This deck has always been cooking, bro. Um, like I said, for the past couple of these decks, Droll is in the weird spot, so it makes certain decks playable. Um, and I would say Drytron is one of them. Um,
mm-hmm.
it still sets up the same Drytron board. You're not getting your 7 negates, thank God, because I wouldn't want to play if everybody was doing that. But you do have a couple options. You can set up your Vanities Ruler. You can set up your turn skip. You can set up your they can't special summon with Chaos Max. Amber Factor Pain got a errata, even though
A buff, yeah.
yeah, it just does not activate and you skip their main phase. So that is crazy. Just getting it's not really the main phase that's the problem. It's the fact that we get through their battle phase and get to keep everything on board, which means they can't out our Amber Factor uh, with battle. You know what I mean? So now they have to
Yeah.
figure out how to out it without an extra monster. So deck's good. It does lose to Droll. It's just like Dark World. But like Nick said, people are playing less hand trap, so it's in a good spot, I think.
Also, this deck got a whole lot stronger after the ban list. Arise Heart being gone just sends this deck to the moon. In terms of just being able to recur and keep things going, keep things moving.
Orange to 3.
Orange to 3 is really good. With two Magnamuts gone, less people are going to be able to less people are going to be side decking. Like 6-7 Bestials. They might be playing like one Magnamut and a couple Druid Swarms just for the Unchained matchup. Which you can get some indirect hurt from that, but regardless, it's still going to be a really really you'll be able to see success with this kind of deck
For sure, and it is. I mean, that's why it's here in this spot. I think, and I think you put it in the right spot. It does lose to some of the cards that the best deck lose to, being the Bestials. It does lose to Dweller. It does lose to like the Graveyard interaction. It loses to Flu because of the banishing, but I would say it's in a good spot because not every deck can do that anymore. We're not playing against the Rise Heart every single game. So
yeah, a lot of whole lot of good things going for this deck. So
honorable
right.
mention,
So,
real quick.
oh yeah,
Nick and I talked about this before we started recording too, which is Virtual World. That I
yeah, shout out to the guy who apparently got top 64 at the YCS.
bro, that is my hero, man. He got top 64 with VW. He was like, no more Rise Heart. I'm making Shen Shen cry about it. So the deck is good. Once we get into the sideboard options, we'll talk about probably the best card in the game right now. So stay tuned for that. But it does do a lot for that deck. So that's our honorable mention. But let's jump into the side cards.
Yeah, so starting off, DD Crow has probably been one of the most hyped cards going into this format. It hits Pearly. It hits if you're gonna get the Blue Dog out of grave for the Unchained deck. It hits the tier limit monsters. It can Branded Fusion hit stuff. Like against Dragon Link, against Vanadium. Just all the decks right now in the format essentially get hit by this card. So this is a side deck card, or I would almost say it's main deck worthy, which is something that we saw in the YCS finals. Which, yeah,
it is one of those cards. Yeah, it's always been a good card. It sometimes falls out of favor because it doesn't really interact with the format, but it's one of those cards that interacts really well with a lot of decks. And the reason for that is because it's a targeted graveyard banish. Whereas, like, if you're going to Bell or try to Meister something, you can get chain blocked. So if your opponents know what they're doing, your Crow is a much better card. So,
Yeah.
um,
And the cool thing is that with everybody playing around, with not having to worry about a Rice Heart anymore, they're going to be playing more graveyard reliant decks. So cards like DD Crow and like the next card that we're going to talk a little bit, but like the Bestials, especially the Druid Swarm, a lot of those cards and a lot of those decks aren't prepared for these kind of things. So I think DD Crow is a little bit better than like Druid Swarm just because like it can hit more things this format. Um, and like the body isn't as impactful as it used to be. But regardless, both of these are going to be like really, really good cards this format.
yeah, I mean, Druid Swarm's good for all the same reasons Crow is, but Crow's just maybe a tiny bit better because it doesn't only hit light and darks, and it can hit any card in the grave, so it can interact with weird stuff that's going to trigger on a new chain. Such so I also like it because it's a good side deck if you're playing like Pearly. You can side like Where Art Thou's, and we'll talk about another card that can search Where Art Thou a little bit later. But yeah, I think Crow is probably one of the best, if not the best, hand trap right now.
Yeah, it's pretty good story.
Um, moving on, we have since we talked about Druid Swarm, we're going on to Phantasme. I'll let you take this one a little bit because I think I know where we're going with this, but I'm gonna let you drive.
Yeah. So first of all, just like the hand advantage that you get with this card, it's so good. It gives you protection. It's good. It's especially good against the Unchained deck. It can play against the more modern versions of the tier deck, against Dragon Link, against like Vanadium, and whenever they make Cross Sheep, Vanquish Soul deck. Like all these cards are making Link monsters. So they're getting more like basically the Link monsters are becoming more prevalent in the format where we haven't seen them probably in the past, gosh, what 5 6 months. So just yeah, this card is just going to be really good. The protection, the consistency of it. So I think it's going to be really good this format.
I agree. I think Phantasme is up there, especially because it interacts with Unchained in a way that not many other cards can. It's one of the only good side deck cards for Unchained, besides like evenly matched and like going second blowout cards. Plus, like you said, the advantage is crazy. So yeah, I agree. Phantasme is a good option if you're looking for something for Unchained.
And also just being able to see some of it lets you see other side deck cards. So like if you're playing up against like something like like Unchained, okay, yeah, you draw two, maybe you draw into a DD Crow, maybe you draw into a Nib, maybe you draw like just it lets you see more cards in your deck. You're digging at least +2, so
Maybe you draw
I,
into a Droplet, a Druid Worm, any combination, like crazy stuff.
yeah,
So,
or
um,
just more combo pieces to play through interruptions, whatever it is. So just unbrick your hand essentially for free.
um, speaking of, we kind of did cover Lancia, but it is another good card to talk about because it does beat some of the Bestials. If they're doing it during your turn or their turn, you can activate it from hand. Um, it does beat D-Link. It does beat Flu. So if you struggle against those kinds of decks, I would hard recommend playing Lancia. For my babies out there playing Drytron, play Lancia. You can search it. Goes crazy.
Yeah. I mean, like a lot of reasons. D Shifter, if there's a deck, which we'll talk about here in a minute, if there's a deck that can play D Shifter, they're going to be playing it. So just having some way to counter that. Just a lot of decks like Dragon Link, if they can't banish, sometimes they struggle. Like a lot of decks, they want to banish when they want to, or they don't want their cards banished at all, stuff like that. So, like the PK deck, if I can't banish cards, I'm kind of SOL. If all my cards are getting banished, same thing.
Same with Virtual Realm. You lose to this
exactly.
card.
So, regardless, Lancia, I guess we can kind of put Lancia and D Shifter kind of in the same boat, or as very similar boats. They're both either locking you out of something or forcing you to do something.
The only difference is not every deck can play Shifter, because Shifter is that guy. I hate him. Um, it's going to be in decks like Flu. It's going to be in decks like Vanquish Soul. Um, does I does Unchained play it? They can, right? I don't think they want
They
to
can't.
because of the support, but
Yeah, Yama in the graveyard is just too good for them to play Lancia.
or
And then D Shifter, they just like all the cards in there. They need to be. They don't need to go to the graveyard, but that's how they kind of maintain all of their resources.
for sure, yeah. Shifter just, I mean, it kind of destroys everything except for like the two best decks in the game right now. So,
Yeah. So,
um,
uh, going on, I guess. Yeah, I mean those two are kind of self-explanatory. But going on to Nib. Nib is probably one of my favorite cards for this coming format, just because it's good against a good Unchained player. You can probably get it off, but against some of the more better players, it'll struggle just a little bit. But it's in an awkward spot. It can be good against Flu if they play into it. Um, Tier and Branded maybe not so much, but like Dragon Link definitely, Vanadium definitely. Um, the what is it? The Sun Avalon deck, stuff like that. Sprite can play into it. Just it's the matchups that it's good in. It's insane against. But other than that, it's going to be really really tough for it to be like super duper viable. I still think it's good though. I think it was still worth checking at least two of them.
yeah, Nib's a good card. It's always going to be a good card. So, I think if you can get your opponent to play into it, you're gonna win. So,
Yeah.
um,
And then I guess I'll let you talk about Fenrir a little bit.
Fenrir is he's that guy. Same as Shifter. He is probably one of the best cards in the game. Still, he's still at 3. He is very very powerful. Getting an extra body, getting your banish, it contests so much. It has just so much board presence because of its attack points and its banish effect. I mean, you guys know what he does by now after dealing with a Rise Heart for so long, but he is just, he's still a broken card, and just because Cashier isn't in the game does not mean you're not going to see this card.
Yeah. I mean, it's literally just Pankratops 2.0. It's broken, free hand advantage. It just being on the board is oppressive. So, like this has single handedly won me games just having that on the board. So.
Just him, which is crazy. So,
just him, just he is the pressure.
Yeah, he's that guy. Speaking of, we talked about Droll a lot, I feel like. So we can skip over that, but we do have a card that's coming back into favor, and this is one of my personal favorite cards in the game. I love Forbidden Droplet. It is one of the most broken cards. Your opponent can't respond to it. You can dodge targeted negation. You can use resources on your field that otherwise would have gone to waste. It is a very, very powerful card.
Yeah, I mean, yeah, you touched on it a little bit. I also think this is a pretty high skill card. Yeah, there's a whole lot of ways that you can use this card to play around things. Like it can really, really be good against like Unchained if you like normal summon something. And then they tried to get rid of it with the link 2 guy, just chain it, and then you can negate the DDD guy. So a lot of ways that you can use this card to play around stuff. It's also just a good addition to an end board. Like if you use up all your negates already, then you can just kind of set that card and use it to get rid of some stuff and continue disrupting your opponent. So
yeah, it's powerful. And the fact that it's blue makes it good. So another blue card that we can talk about.
It's a blue lightning.
Yes, exactly. It's fast. Yeah. We have Book of Moon. Now, I did get Book of Moon the other day when I was playing Drytron, and it felt terrible because I booked my Vanity's Ruler. So I guess I had to cry about it. But it's kind of in a weird spot right now. I think it's still good, but it's not as good as it once was. Last format, it was crazy because it added a Rise Heart like no tomorrow. Whereas this format, it's kind of still finding its place in certain decks. Like it's going to be good in Flu. It's going to be good in cards that you have to dodge imperm, like your normal summon decks. It's always been good for that. It does out problem cards. So, yeah. But Go ahead.
Yeah, this deck is super versatile right now. I mean, like you mentioned it, just being able to dodge stuff, but also just like the going second capabilities. Getting rid of the DDD, getting rid of an impen. Just being able to prevent a noir, just stuff like that. It's also really good against like Vanquish Soul. And it's really good against like all the for hire decks, or not the for hire decks, all the runic decks. So all you have to do is just book their extra deck monster face down, and they kind of lose. Like if you book a Hugin, it's game over.
Nice deck.
No. Yeah, like really. Nice extra monsters, an idiot. So I think this card, and kind of like we talked about before with a lot of these cards, the matchups that it's good in, it's going to be absolutely insane in. But anything else, it's going to be really, really tough.
Mm-hmm, for sure. Speaking of, now that we've talked about a quick play spell, we can talk about a normal spell that I personally believe is the best card in the game right now. This card is incredible. It is in almost every list that was in the top 64 in this YCS, and that would be Triple Tactics Thrust. Um, you get to search any normal spell or trap from your deck if your opponent activates a monster during your turn.
Period. Like, Unchained can take advantage of it. They can set. They don't even have to add it. They can just set one of their trap cards and keep extending. Flu can just search out the Harpy's Featherstorm as a blowout card. A lot of these decks can just search follow up. They can set D barriers. They can set all types of
the
stuff.
restriction on it isn't even a restriction, right? Because if we're talking about how it only adds normal spells and trap cards, right? Well, in reality, it can add a monster because you can add a normal spell that adds a monster. You can add an archetype support. You can add terraforming, which searches a field spell. You can add just about anything with this card. It is honestly the card. Now, I personally think it's one of the cards that should be included in every list, but it unfortunately comes with a high price tag. But if you can get it, I would get it if you want to play competitive for sure.
Yeah, there's so many things that you can do with this deck. It's for most decks, like especially like game 2s and 3s, it can be a going first card where you set some of your floodgates. It can also be a going second card where you can search cards like Herald of the Abyss or Dark River No More. All these other like different
Triple Tactics talents. The choices are endless, man.
There's so much stuff that you can do.
You need to draw 2 more cards, sure. You need to rip a card from your opponent's hand, sure. You need to banish every card on their field, search evenly match, sure.
Yep.
So it is one of those cards that is a very expensive card, and in my opinion, it's one of those cards that is probably going to be hit at some point. So be wary of purchasing it, but also it is insane right now. So
yeah, you'll be safe for the next 3 months, but
yes,
regardless, there's a reason that so many good players are playing it.
It's absurd. Moving on, we've talked about D-Barrier quite a bit. It beats a lot of decks. It unfortunately doesn't beat Link Monsters, so Unchained still gets to do that. But they don't get to make the Broken Interruption, which is kind of the reason to be playing the deck right now. It beats just a bunch of those top tier decks. As long as you know what you're doing, know when to use it, know what to call. But it is a going first card, so do with that what you will. Kind of more of a shot call. Like you're gonna put it in if you know you lose to a certain deck.
Yeah. It's really good against Pearly. Basically everything that's not a Link monster deck, or like a backrow deck.
Mm-hmm.
So, it's true. It can be kind of niche, but regardless, I think it's still going to be something that you can include. If there's like certain matchups that you really struggle against, like maybe you don't struggle against the Unchained deck, but you're like really struggling against like Tearlament, or maybe you're really struggling against like I don't know, like the Synchron deck, or the Chimera deck. All those auto lose to like D-Barrier. So
For sure.
And then 2 other blowout cards, one of which is probably one of my this is probably my most hated card in the game is Tisibu. This is probably one of the most like toxic cards in the game, but also like it's so freaking strong, man. The Unchained deck You flip this on them, it's over. You flip this on like Flu, they're going to really struggle. This like that card is just so insane. If you can play it, you should be playing it.
I agree. Yeah.
Period.
It is. It's always been that card, but right now it is that card. So, same with Summon Limit, Floodgates. I mean, I hate playing into these cards. It just sometimes it's not fun if I'm being honest, but they are powerful. If we're playing competitively, we have to accept that these are cards that people are going to put in their deck because everybody wants to win. So, you can't summon more than twice.
Yeah, and the decks that are using this card either have their own way to out it, or they can play under 2 summons. You know, so this is something that you need to be prepared for, whether it be altering your game plans, whether it be different types of interactions that you need to be able to be prepared for. So
Yeah.
definitely Summon Limit and Tikaboo, especially if you're playing against like Vanquish Soul, or if you're playing especially the Pearly deck. A lot of those decks are going to be playing stuff like Tikaboo and Summon Limit just because they can out it super easily, or they can play under it.
For sure, for sure.
So just something that you guys can test out. Maybe put it into your testing circle. Like, hey, how are we going to be able to play around this card? If we can't, maybe we need to have some outs for it.
Yeah, I mean that's kind of it for our meta review. If you guys like this kind of content, make sure you let us know down in the comments below, because I really enjoyed making this, especially with Nick, who is the best co-host I could have asked for. So if you do like it, please let me know, because I'm really trying to find other content to make for you guys that also doesn't take up my entire day. So if you guys like it, make sure you leave a like in the comments down below. Make sure you subscribe, and we'll see you guys in the next video.
All right, peace out, guys.
Peace.